We are going to recap what we just talked about with the two processes and talk about what other alternatives there are to those. So, just like we've been doing, watch the video, answer the questions based on what you see and what you hear. If you have questions, let me know. We can set something up to talk. All right, so just to recap, there are only two ways to really be here legally. Legally, obviously, being the key word. We'll discuss illegal immigration next class. Um, First is being born here or falling into any of those other born here type of scenarios we talked about earlier, whether it be your parent is a citizen, born on in a territory like Puerto Rico, stuff like that. Also, going through the residency process, or what we've been calling the green card process. If you fall under those two categories, you can be here legally. So, obviously, with the residency process, you can be a resident for life. You can have your green card as long as you follow all the rules and parameters that we saw in the last section with the naturalization process. You have to be here for a certain amount of time. If you leave for longer than that time, you can lose your green card, and that's what we talked about in the naturalization process. So as long as you follow all those rules, you can be a resident for life. You can become, like we talked about, a naturalized citizen, but it's not necessary. You don't have to become a naturalized citizen to stay here legally. If you have your green card, as long as you follow the green card rules, you're good to go. Um, some other little differences visiting the United States. So, just like visiting any foreign country, you need a passport. So, people are allowed to travel and vacation and visit in the United States, but you have to have a passport. When you come in, you go through customs. Just like any other country, this is not unique to the US, this is for everybody. Visiting any other foreign country. So, even when you travel, you need a passport, you need to go through customs. If anything, is determined to be out of place while you're going through customs to enter another country, you can obviously be detained or sent back or not allowed in or whatever. Um, but those are on a person-to-person basis. But yes, you can be somebody from another country and come here and visit and vacation in the United States like other people do to other countries. This is obviously temporary. You can't stay here legally forever. Um, so that varies based on why you're here. If it's for business, if it's for pleasure, you only get X amount of time that you can visit, and then from there, if you are caught being here longer than you're allowed to, then you can face other consequences. Travel and work visas are a thing. Similar to kind of having a passport, you can, if you're here for seasonal work, there's a lot of seasonal workers, especially in farming communities, like the Southwest and the Midwest, where people from other countries can come work the farms. But once farming season's over, so once winter hits and you're not really farming, you go back. If you're caught here without going back when you're supposed to, you can obviously face legal issues. And that again is temporary based on the parameters of that travel or work situation. Um, Staying longer than you need to could lead to legal issues and deportation if caught, which we've kind of touched on already. Obviously, if you have a clean record and you get busted, you will get deported, and that will go on your record. If you have other criminal issues, then getting caught here will get you expedited to your country of origin, and obviously, possibly being processed in your country of origin, and then you're in their hands. In the U.S., if you haven't committed any illegal acts in the U.S., then they'll send you to your home country. If you've committed illegal acts in the U.S., and you can still be processed here in the U.S. and subject to those jail times and such. All right, other options. So these are the two basic, obviously, being born here and having the residency, but there are other options which we've kind of alluded to. Anything that is government approved, a government approved program, reform, or law is obviously another way that illegal people or people not born here can enter the country. Like we saw in Ellis Island, that was a government approved scenario where people were allowed to legally come in through Ellis Island, like we saw in that video, as long as you fit those parameters and speculations that they were looking for. Like we saw, there was only about 2% of people that weren't allowed in. Amnesty Act. This is what we saw in the movie. It's the Amnesty Act, and we're going to talk more about that in just a second. But through history, the U.S. government has approved various programs and reforms where people have been allowed to legally stay in the country, and these are the two that we've talked about. So we're going to elaborate more on what this Amnesty Act is and how it affected people when it came out. So what we saw in the movie, that Amnesty Act was called the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. It was enacted or signed into law November 6th, 1986. The dates are going to be important here, so make sure we're paying attention. It was known as the Simpson-Mazzoli Act. So there was two senators, a guy last name Simpson and a guy last name Mazzoli, who were the two guys that kind of led the charge on this bill, and the bill was kind of named after them. So this IRCA Act, as it was also known, the Reform Act of '86 was also known as the Simpson-Mazzoli Act because those are the two guys in charge. And this is a photo of Ronald Reagan, the president at the time, signing the bill into law. So he was the one in charge of the United States at that time because he was the president in the '80s, and he's the guy that signed it. All right. So the speculations of that meant this. Here's what the act did. It required employers to attest to their employees' immigration status, meaning, like we saw in the movie, if an immigration official came to a place of employment and asked to see proof of their workers, the employees needed to provide proof. So that's what we saw at the beginning of the movie, where the immigration officials were asking for papers to make sure everybody belonged, because this act made it illegal to hire or recruit illegal immigrants knowingly. And knowingly is the key word because, as we saw, people could fake paperwork. So if I am running a business and somebody shows me paperwork and I think it's legit, as long as I have that same paperwork to prove to somebody that's asking that this person is legal, I didn't knowingly hire that person knowing they were illegal if the paperwork was fake. All right, if I thought it was real, I'm okay. But if I knew that these people didn't have real papers and I still hired them anyway, I, the business owner, could also get in trouble. It legalized seasonal agricultural legal immigrants. So like we said earlier, people who worked in farming communities as seasonal workers, you could come here and stay and work. And also it legalized illegal immigrants who entered the United States before January 1st, 1982. So here's where people get lost. The bill was signed in '86, November '86, but the date set for people to qualify for this Reform Act was bumped back to January 1st, 1982. Basically, and this is what we saw with the father, what this means is if you came into the country before this date that's highlighted in yellow, as long as you could prove that you were here and didn't have any outstanding warrants or legal issues, and you could prove that you'd been here, then you could stay here. That's what we saw in the movie. The dad needed to get all the signatures to prove he was here before '82, and then he could stay. But he was having a hard time doing it. Now, we can assume that this is the Reform Act used in the movie, even though it's never mentioned by name, because the movie was set in the late '80s, early '90s. If we look at how old Marta is in the movie, we know she's turning 15. So let's just say, for the sake of ease, that the movie takes place in 1990. Backtrack 15 years to when Marta was born, 1975. We know that Marta was born in the United States, so she's a legal citizen. That means dad would be in the country before this date, so he qualified. So as long as you could prove that you were here and working and you had a basic knowledge of the English language, which we know the father did in the movie, then you could stay. All right, and he was having his own issues for separate reasons. He hired a bad lawyer, and immigration traps were set all the time, and those were a real thing. Immigration would set up scenarios where they try to deport people, lure people in under the false guise of, hey, this is a good place for you to be, or they would just simply do raids. They'd show up to a place that was known to hire illegal people and take all the people away. But this act, again, was one of those government-approved situations where you could stay as long as you met all the requirements. So we have our three kind of major things going on there. So that's going to be the end for this one. Next video, we're going to talk about immigration situations today and kind of how that's affecting everything, and we'll take it from there.